Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Helen Soslowski. I'm the events director for Oblong Books in New York's Hudson Valley. If you have questions for our panelists at any time during the program, please type them into the chat. Or there's a Q&A module that you can see at the bottom of your screen, and you can put them in there. And we will address them at the end of the conversation portion of the program. We're very pleased to welcome Jayne Allen this evening, who's joining us to talk about her new novel, Black Girls Must Be Magic, which is published by HarperCollins and available in both our Oblong Books stores in Millerton and Rhinebeck, and also online through oblongbooks.com. Jayne Allen is the pen name of Janique Seeley, a graduate of Duke University and Harvard Law School. Drawing from her unique experiences as an attorney and an entrepreneur, she crafts transcultural stories that touch upon contemporary women's issues such as workplace and career dynamics, race, fertility, modern relationships, and mental health awareness. She called her first novel, the bestseller Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, the epitaph of my 30s. A proud native of Detroit, she currently lives in Los Angeles. Conducting the conversation with Jayne this evening is Lacey Schwartz-Delgado. Lacey is an award-winning writer, director, producer, storyteller, and outreach strategist who uses the power of narratives to build community and impact change. Lacey is the director and producer of the nationally and internationally recognized personal documentary Little White Lie, and most recently was co-executive producer with Alicia Keys of the documentary How It Feels to Be Free for PBS's American Masters, which examines the overlooked contributions of female Black performers. Welcome to you both. It's a pleasure to have you with us this evening, and I'll hand over to you, Lacey, to start us off.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. First of all, as typically in pouring rain in upstate New York, my internet was giving me challenges, but we're back and making it work. Hi, Jayne, how are you?
Hi, Lacey. I know it's weird to call me Jayne, so.
Well, first of all, for those of you watching, very importantly to note is that we were just talking in the pre-show that Jayne and I have known each other half of our lives. We actually went to law school together. And so it's really exciting and an honor to be in this conversation with you on so many levels. I'm a proud friend, but I'm also a fan. So it's exciting.
No, this has been one of my most looked forward to events, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is my friend. But I mean, what you've done obviously is amazing, and I'm a fan. And the fact that we can sit and have a conversation from coming from law to being in the arts is amazing. So I'm really excited.
Well, that tees me up exactly where I wanted to start, because I wanted to start from, I mean, what you and I both share is the law to the arts. And I really wanted you to share that journey, like how and why writing.
So the first, I think, step I took off the path was, and same with you too, I happen to know this about our journeys in common, thesis time, third year of law school, when it was supposed to be a research paper. And that's your first opportunity to kind of fight for your vision for yourself. And what I decided to do was, first I wanted to write a novel about my perspective, my experience in law school. And then I tried doing that. I felt like I was going crazy. I did not even start it the right way and wound up renegotiating to write a screenplay. But that was that first moment where I saw that I could complete something, like a complete dramatic arc, and write a story. And then I still, for whatever reason, was very afraid of writing long form story narrative, and stayed away from it for years, and went into a career in the music industry, but was always writing along the way. And I started publishing nonfiction books because I wanted to learn the book publishing industry. But it wasn't until 2016 that I first got the idea that I could write fiction and narrative fiction, and in the form of a novel. I just thought that like there was some kind of fairy dust or something that that sprinkled on people, and maybe it had missed me. But but thankfully at some point I decided to challenge that that mental hurdle.
And so what made you want to write in the first, like what really made you want to write? Like, and why did you stick with it for that long?
I had in my mind since I was a kid, I always thought that people put the very best parts of themselves in books. And when I would go in to a bookstore, or a library, I imagined I was surrounded by the best parts of people. Like there's, I had a vivid imagination. I'd see this like golden light of inspiration and positivity when I go into these spaces just with books. And anytime I had a problem or whatever. So my natural instinct was if anything good happened to me, if I had learned something important, if I had something I really needed to share with people, that the best gift back is in a book. And so I'd had a very, very fortunate career, very amazing experiences, had opportunities to learn lessons, work alongside people who have had once a lifetime kind of experiences. And so every time I finished something, when I worked with Lady Gaga, and I decided I was going to write a book, a nonfiction book about social media, or I finished working on a startup project, and I decided I would write something about resilience. And then I found out, I started reading something about story and how people process story and the importance of story. And I realized if I really had something that I wanted to do that was important, that fiction was going to be the most powerful vehicle. And so that's what motivated me to move past my hurdles of imposter syndrome. That I really, in 2016, this was in the kind of height of the Trump presidency. And for me as a Black woman, how I felt was unseen and uncelebrated. And I felt like if that was how I was feeling, a lot of other women similarly situated must have been feeling something like that. And so I wanted to write something that would be that celebration and that would be that seeing of us. And so that was what the foundational idea was.
I love that. And everything you said about books, and shout out to Oblong bookstore, which is, my local bookstore in the town
for the golden light of inspiration.
Totally. And it's like every time you just walk in, I mean, I know exactly what you're describing in terms of that feeling of walking into bookstores and how you feel when you walk into it. And particularly excited at the inspiration for even doing this. I mean, I'd always thought about doing this when I knew you had a book coming out, but one day what really kicked me to actually reach out to Helen was that, when I walked in, and on the way that Oblong is set up is that there's kind of the books that they're recommending at that time when you first walk in, and sitting there was your book. And it was so exciting to see it and to see that all come to fruition. And you talked about, just want to talk a little bit more about like the process, because that's one of the things that I'm most fascinated with as a lover of books and a writer myself. And you said getting past imposter syndrome. Like, it sounds like in a lot of ways you just sat down and you just did it, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that took for you.
I did not just sit down and do it at all. So I am I'm an engineer before law school. And so I'm like, I need structure, I need to kind of way to learn the system. And so I took classes for fiction reading, and I had to learn structure. It says my internet connection's unstable. Is it?
Is it her, or is that me that she's unstable? I think it's
Jayne.
It's Jayne. Okay.
Can you hear me again?
Your signal's freezing, Jayne.
You froze for a second.
Am I back now?
Yeah, you could.
Yep, you're back.
You could go out and come back in again, but if that's usually a good way to try it, but you're okay now.
It's okay now?
Yep.
Okay. So sorry about that. The fun of virtual eventing. So I decided I was going to take lessons, and that was how I learned story structure. I realized that writing a novel was really about structure and story structure. I went all the way nerdy and even researched what a novel was. I mean, I was like, what is a novel? Like, why is this a form that people have picked for books? And so I realized that it's really about a structure, and that I could learn the structure. So that's what I decided to do, and it took me about 2 years in learning structure, workshopping the story, building confidence, learning, and I decided to learn different components of the story crafting process. Like I studied character development. I studied writing emotion. I took an erotica writing class. I did all of these component pieces that I thought would make this engrossing experience of a story, as long as I could get the structure and the craft right. So that was how I went about doing it. And I really, really focused on character crafting. And I also decided, since I was going to feature this Black woman as my protagonist, I went about an internal journey of figuring out what certain things meant to me. Like, what did it mean to me to be Black? And what did it mean to me to be a woman? Because I wanted it to have a substantive representation, for this character and for all the characters in the book.
It's so interesting. I feel like it also, one of the things, and we'll get more into this later, but also just the idea of like, what does it mean to be a professional?
Yeah.
And also different ages. But the professional piece, I felt like really came through in a very strong way, and watching you process that.
Yeah. There were a lot. I think I call it the epitaph of my 30s. And because I really had to think, what was life about and what were the lessons? Because I feel like a really distinct difference between 30 and 40. And in your 30s, your 20s, you're just kind of feeling it out. Nothing really means anything, because it's like you're not even really internalizing time or consequence exactly. You're on some kind of track or not, and it just seems like life is unfolding ahead of you. But it's something about 30 and adulthood seems to intersect, and you start to internalize the meanings of things. And so for me, it was really important to go into my own internal processing of what the meanings of these things actually were, and the meaning of career, the meaning of family, the meaning of gender and friendships and relationships and race, and all of those things that kind of converge to create a person's identity and ultimately their experience in life, and some of the things that they have to face and deal with. So, and then what's it all for? Like the purpose of it, I guess the search for fulfillment, or whatever it is that we're doing all this for.
I mean, it's so true. I think that, I was going to ask you how you channel your own experiences into this, but I feel like that really, really spoke to that. And how we use, one of the things I think a lot in terms of my art is how I'm using it to process life.
Yeah.
How life can be so confusing. And so part of it is, how do you use it to process it? And then also, when you, at the same time, going back to what you said about how 2016 was for you, this idea of like, well, if I'm going through this, are other people going through it as well?
Yeah. It was that experience and that feeling. I was worried about people. Like I'd seen a lot of people like mental health issues. I'd lost a couple of friends to suicide. I was thinking, like, what can I do? And again, that thought of the best thing I could do is write a book. Like that's the best service I can render. And so I decided that I was going to try to do something with this book that would be in effect. If you open the pages, you would be in a space of healing, of representation, of seeing, of celebration, on a journey that you could trust toward getting something out of it more than just hours lost in entertainment. That you could close those pages and have an internal transformation. That was my goal in that. And so I was talking to another author about writing about trauma and writing about life paralleling events. And I made a decision as a writer that I would never write unprocessed trauma. Like if you write about life, you're going to have to write about trauma. But I think some writers will just put the rawness out there, and it's just, it's just raw. And it's not processed. It's just, it is what it is. And that's one approach of it. But for me, I decided I wasn't going to do that. If I'm taking the reader, on this kind of roller coaster emotionally, I know where we're winding up, and it's not going to be unprocessed trauma. And I'm like leaving somebody in a space where I haven't done my work. So I write about trauma in some parts of the book, but I don't leave it unprocessed. It's definitely that, emotional payoff moment, but you have to kind of go through the ups and downs of it to get there.
I mean, related to that, I feel like I would love to hear about the titles, to the books, because I think that, the first one being Black Girls Must Die Exhausted, and the other one being Black Girls Must Be Magic, which in certain ways feels like two sides of this. I'm not sure I understand. I have a watch. Two sides of the same coin of trauma. So I'd love you to talk about, the inspiration for the titles and what that meant for you.
Yeah. The title, when I came about the title, it was kind of almost separate from the story, but I wanted a title that could tell its own story and that sounded like something that somebody had said before, even if I was just coming up with it. So to me, that meant it had to contain sort of a truth in it that was just foundational and very basic. And so I was minding my own experience, and I was looking for the word. And this was again in 2016, although I don't know that much is different, but the word was exhausted. I mean, there was just so much happening. It was, it was killings in police custody, and there was the gender issues. It was, it was just everything. It was, the immigration discussion. It was just nothing that me as a Black woman could turn away from and just say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with me. It all did, all of it. And the word of just on a day-to-day basis, just I call it tears in the fabric of your reality, of your day-to-day experience. All of that is exhausting. All the things you're carrying, all of the things that you're dealing with. And so I wanted to take that word, give truth to it, give it acknowledgement, but put perspective to it, where if you wake up to what you're living in your life, like I think we're all living a word, and if we wake up to that word and it's not what we want it to be, like, I don't want my word to be exhausted at the end of my days. I want my word to be, fulfilled or whatever it is. So it's just this waking up to the word that you're living and deciding that you have agency to make it what you want to be. So at the end of your days, you can say, this was my word, and I picked this word, and I intentionally lived this word. So that's the title, the foundations of that title. And throughout the course of the novel, it changes meaning a few times. And it's sort of that cultural alchemy that we do with words, where, we take something that's meant to be negative, and all of a sudden, if something's sick, now that's, good, or it's something stupid, that's now like one of the best things. So it's like a cultural alchemy that is part of Blackness and Black culture, to take something, a meaning of something that isn't positive or doesn't come to you as positive, and ultimately turn into something that's the best thing. And so with this story, that was part of what I attempted to do with the title. I guess people have to decide for themselves, but to make that ending meaning of that title something that was ultimately a call to inspiration and fulfillment.
I think it's interesting because the idea of like Black girl magic, which is a term that you hear quite a bit. A bunch of years ago, I did a part of a series for Essence where we doing portraits of women that represented Black girl magic. And I featured a woman named Dorian, a young woman who at the time was still in college, who had founded an organization around people like herself who had lost family members to gun violence. And this idea of like her speaking her truth of what it means to be an activist, what it means to create community for other women. And I feel like those themes are so prevalent in your book. And this idea of, I love the must be, because it's kind of that twist, right? It's like, well, are they forced to be? Or of course, are they because they end up being magical. And I love
Right.
the kind of, it's like the double entendre of it.
Yeah, well, it's meant to be that, like, it's meant to have that secondary meaning, and maybe even a third meaning, where it's like it requires you to think about that, to ask the question, and I guess there should be a question mark after the titles, maybe. But for magic, that's kind of the nature of it. It's like we are, but we're kind of forced. We are Black girls must be magic in the sense that we're required to show up that way, because you have to have some kind of magic to deal with the extra layers of experience that you're required to shoulder in the way that society is crafted, the experience of Blackness. But then there's there's a magic to it that there's just a cultural magic that comes through, as sort of a survival mechanism for the spirit, in a sense. So it's sort of, again, that kind of nod to the cultural alchemy too, of taking the worst of things. Like Black women have done this historically for generations, taken the worst of the food scraps and turned it into soul food. It's just it's that sense of cultural alchemy and an acknowledgement of that. So that's what I wanted to bring into these books also, this sense of this experience and celebration of this without talking it at someone, like this is just, you can come into this space and feel it and experience it and understand it, but I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm just going to bring you here, and you get to walk the walk. That's really what the books are meant to read like.
I love that. On that note, I'd love to dig in a little bit more to some of the characters in it, because I think that there's it's in a lot of ways, I feel like it's a book of many love stories, but also many challenging relationships. And at the core of the books is very much, yes, there's romantic relationships that are dealt with, but it's really the friendships. And so, I'd love you to talk about this, the theme of Black female friendships, both the amazingness of it, but also the challenges.
Yeah, it was really important for me to write characters and relationships that were really imperfect, but yet also really perfect, and with Tabitha, she has her friends Alexis and Laila, and they're tight, they're good friends, and they have their regular kikis and they get together. And when Tabby's life starts to unravel, their lives also it just triggers the unraveling of all these other lives as well. And one of the things for me, my way of approaching character and plot is it's really character centered. I do a lot of character development. So these characters, for me, it's like, if I put them in a room, you should be able to know who they are. If there were people in a room, you should know, oh, that's this person. And so with these characters, it's more like trying to figure out how far it takes to move past that strong Black woman facade that we operate in the world with. And there was a lot that needed to happen, I found, plot wise and circumstantially and everything. People are like, Tabby's dealing with a lot. I'm like, yeah, it was a lot that I had to throw at her to get past that strong facade into the vulnerability and into the story, where now she has to be vulnerable. She has to show that imperfect inside. And the same with her friends. We have, Alexis is that she married young. She's been living her life as kind of this woman with a husband and 2 kids. And she's got her identity solidified, but yet there's a lot going on behind the scenes that she's not seeing, she's not sharing. And then it starts to unravel. And the same with Laila. She's the strong friend, and she's the one that everybody looks up to. And she's like, oh, she always speaks her mind and she's got it all together, but she doesn't. But it takes so much to get to that place where you're able to see that. And I wanted to show that because I thought that's so important, because we don't see that in everyday life. We see the facade most of the time, and we're not there when it all breaks down. So even in closest friendships, I think we all show up as we try to hold on to that facade as much as we can, as long as we can, until we can't anymore. And so I wanted to show that in the story. And I wanted to show that even in the space of breaking down, that these women still figure out how to show up for each other. They're still there for each other, even when things are falling apart between them. It's like, well, no, but still, I'm going to show up for you no matter what. And so that imperfection of friendship, but still being perfect, still being effective, still being powerful. I love that. And I that was one of the things that was just really, really important for me to show and celebrate.
I completely get it. I mean, a few times different characters in Black Girls Must Be Magic talk about this idea of falling in love with yourself, really getting to know yourself.
Yeah.
And seeing how women get to know themselves, not just through their romantic relationships, but also through challenges with their friendships and other relationships as well. And I think, with Mark, the main love interest in the book, I also think that that's a whole nuanced thing where this is not in any way, so often reading books where fundamentally gets this like happily ever after,
Mm-hmm.
even if that's a little bit of a unique version. I think this is very different from that and how you see that. I mean, without like giving really anything away, but seeing how their relationship evolves. And so maybe you could speak to just the desire to really have the romantic relationships be so nuanced.
Well, I think that they are, even if we don't realize they are in life, and I think we think of romance and novels, romance novels, where like kind of there's a romantic relationship and there's a happily ever after. Those are kind of the ingredients of it. And you could characterize this as a romance novel in the sense that there's a romantic relationship and there's a sense of a happily ever after for the protagonist, even if it's girl gets herself. And so with these two, it was really important for me to give humanity to Mark, where, in the beginning of the story, he's this paper perfect partner, but then when stuff starts to happen and things go awry, then that unraveling starts, where he has to go down his own path of self-discovery and find a way to be honest. And the real interaction starts to happen. And at the end of the first book, Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. But he continues into the second book and their relationship is still complex. And now, he's there by his choosing in certain respects. And so we get to see the real relationship evolve because Mark's now having to do the real work of deciding how and if and why he's going to show up and in what capacity. And Tabby is now doing the real work of, instead of trying to say, oh, you're my paper perfect partner and this is my checklist thing that I'm supposed to do, I've got to decide if you're really right for me, because now I'm choosing myself. So that's more of Black Girls Must Be Magic, is Tabby really, she gets herself, the kernel of herself in the first book. In the second book, she's choosing herself. And so that's a very important distinction and an important part of that journey for her. And she, there's always that temptation to let that go. So that's her struggle in part of this book.
Absolutely. And I love that girl gets herself. So good. And how family plays into that. I mean, even for Mark, how family plays into who he is, but also how family very much plays into who Tabby is. And I mean, with her parents and all the layers around that. But I also really wanted to talk about, like, I feel like you really include the theme of the power of elders, and her relationship, not only with her actual grandmother, but with her grandmother's best friend, is such a strong part of the book, and how I think in a lot of ways Tabby really gets to know herself best and trust herself.
Yeah, and I didn't see that a lot in a lot of fiction that I was reading, contemporary fiction, that layer of exposure to that generation, where I feel like it's relatively common in life. And I thought that it was just important to show that. And for me, in my life, I was very close to my grandmother. And I had a sort of like life epiphany in my early 30s. She developed dementia at the end of her life. And she spent the last 5 years of her life in assisted living facilities. So this is where I saw this. And I realized then that this whole segment of the population of people who've had all this life experience and all this perspective and have run this race and have all this road underneath their feet are not part of our everyday lives in certain ways. And so, and it made me really start to think about that and to think, wow, what are they thinking about? Like, what are we missing out on? There, like what can we be getting out of this interaction and exposure? And the thing I realized is that what they're not thinking about, and what they're not thinking about is the like mundane mistake or overindulgence or whatever little stuff that we get preoccupied with in our younger days. It's just this benefit of perspective where the small things stay small, and the big things you're looking for you're making those big moments and the big meaningful things. The search for meaning and the making of meaning. So that's what these characters allowed me to layer into the story, this context and perspective that allowed me to sort of make what was meaningful, highlight what was meaningful for the reader and for Tabby on her growth journey. Because I think without them, I think she would have been stagnated in some ways. And also looking at with character development. So this was my first novel. And again, Black Girls Beside Exhaust is my first novel, but these characters come from that process. When I did the character development process, I was really into it. So I went back multiple generations. I was like, well, why is this person like this? Well, what were their parents like? And their parents what were their parents like? And their experience had to be something like this for them to be like this. And so it really made me realize the impact of generational experiences and family on who we are and ultimately the decisions that we make. And for these characters, I hope it may be obvious for some people, it may not be, but that is layered into their story, that the generational experiences and legacies become part of their journey unless they make intervening corrections or different decisions or have an awareness of that. So that was just an important, and it was kind of fun to like puzzle experience for me to put all of that together and to discover how one thing interrelated to the other.
Yeah, and also even how even those older characters are still evolving, right? Still having honest, reflective conversations. I mean, I love in the first book when he talks about this idea of like, what are they doing in the rocking chairs, and just that idea of process and reflection at any age. In the workplace, there's definitely some interesting characters, but in particular, I was really struck by Lisa, who feels like she is like the ultimate white ally.
Yeah.
She's kind of like the quintessential white ally. And so, and at first you're not sure,
Right.
Exactly how she'll turn out, but I'd love you to talk about more about this creation of this character, Lisa, who's a very well-intentioned white woman who's really trying to connect and bond with Tabby.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm in the third book now and still working through their relationship. And I really do love their relationship. And I felt like we don't really do an exploration of allyship, in a day-to-day life as much as we could. And so I thought this is also an important relationship to explore, especially from the perspective of a Black woman, because it's like every relationship comes with costs and benefit. And with Lisa, the way that she approaches Tabby in the first book, for her, it seems like it's a lot of cost and it's not a lot of benefit. And so she has to find a way to trust Lisa or let her in. And even where she doesn't, she reaches her breaking point and she doesn't have a choice. So now, once she kind of unravels and she has that moment of unintentional vulnerability with Lisa towards the end of the first book, it opens the door for Lisa to have a better understanding where Tabby wouldn't have necessarily fully trusted her enough to communicate as openly. And I think that relationship of allyship, we don't explore that a lot. And it's so complicated because I think that you can be well-intentioned and not have necessarily a positive net effect. And I think that you could also, on the other side, be guarded to the point where the relationship isn't as constructive as it could be and should be, So I think it's just such an important relationship. And I wanted to just play that out and highlight it, also celebrate it. Obviously, that's not every relationship. It's not reflective of every relationship, but I felt like it was an exploration of that and a topic that we don't really talk about. You don't see it a lot in fiction. I don't think we talk about it a lot, even in, regular conversation. So that was my exploration for these two characters, but it continues to evolve in the second, in Black Girls Must Be Magic, where, Lisa is really, really invested in Tabby, and she becomes increasingly invested. And then in the third book, we will find out why.
Oh, interesting. Because I was going to say, I mean, I can list numerous books where, that the kind of white wannabe ally is not really celebrated. It's actually kind of more of a caricature.
Right, exactly.
And it kind of, if anything, like kind of grates your nerves a little bit. So I really appreciated how Lisa as a character in these books is really, you're not sure, just like Tabby's not sure, but kind of you appreciate the journey with her, and it feels very real in that sense. And similarly, like I felt that way also about Chris, right?
Chris Perkins.
Yeah, about her boss, Chris, who, it's interesting because in certain ways I felt like, she always is, it's more of a question mark with him of like, does he really have Tabby's back? And he certainly triggers her many times, but he's still sticking with her. And so I thought that the nuance of him, combined with the fact that one of the things I really noticed how much she lives in fear of losing her job or not getting promotion. And that, and it's almost like that question mark of, is this real, or is this paranoia, or is it both?
Yeah.
For Black women.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for Black women, we're conditioned in certain ways, like, to unpack that, to attach to our careers as sort of this pathway to freedom, to all the things that have been denied to us, that we are able to be financially self-sufficient if our careers are in order. We're able, because there's not a lot of generational wealth, so your career becomes your pathway to all of the things, to financial stability, security, independence, all of those things, and identity to a certain degree as well. And so she's carrying all of that, and it's definitely magnified with her in her line of career. She's a news reporter, so there's that additional layer of all these eyes on her, the societal eyes, are on her as well. So it magnifies every societal experience for her in particular. So there's the theme of the ratings, and Chris is representing that. And so he's sort of this objective, he's an objective force, and it's unclear whether he's in her corner or not, but then ultimately he is beholden to this objective, well, not objective, but the societal standard of ratings that compromises his relationship with her in moments where he could be and should be more supportive. He's not, because of this. And so it was just an interesting layer to add for her, because it's not really a mentor, it's not really support, but it is a little bit of support. And that's one of the things that I think we have to navigate, where it's always asking this question, can I trust this? And is this helpful? And, the importance of career, where it is this avenue to purportedly all of these things, and where the balance should be struck. So I tried to explore that with this particular character and layer these things in, so that in a way that I specifically picked the career as a newscaster for Tabby because of that, because her job is to see and be seen. And so there's this societal interplay that's there because of that particular career that she has. So hopefully it just gives more layers to the experience and shows more of the nuances of what it's like for her. But Chris, I still I ask myself still, even writing him and even in the third book, where is he coming from?
Yeah, no, I love the fact that he embodies the objective. And then you're questioning sometimes, like, is the objective really objective, or is it just internalized norms of subjectivity that have been passed on? And I think that is really, really framing it well. And then of course, to that point of that, the seeing be seen is hair, and the huge theme that hair plays throughout the book, and is obviously such a big, it's such a big topic for Black women in particular. But I thought what was interesting about it was that it wasn't, yes, Tabby's dealing with what to do with her hair, but it's also her relationship with her hairdresser, who in a lot of ways is really representing her connection to community. And so really also ties that into it. So it's kind of the power of hair for Black women, both the positive and the negative of that, but also how that kind of connects you into the community, no matter what role you're coming from. Even somebody like Tabby, who in a lot of ways we think of newscasters as kind of putting on these wigs and these faces and these, it's all kind of a mask.
Yeah. It's that. Well, for a lot of books that I read, even ones that are inclusive, I found that for the Black woman, maybe she's represented by, she's, brown with crinkly hair, and, she's going about her life. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If a woman's got her natural hair texture, which I'm assuming is like the crinkly hair, and she's wearing that to work, the whole saga of how that happened is its own book for, if you really break it down. And I thought, wow, we don't really explore the inner journey that people have to go through, and the battle of conformity versus non-conformity or authenticity, or, that expectation to deny yourself, your true self, your truth, your actual form, for the sake of conformity, with the belief that that's what's required to be successful with this career path situation. So I thought, wow, it would be great to explore this journey. And there are books that have done that, that in different ways. And so I really wanted to explore that journey, as it pertained to the workplace, and how Black women in particular have to make that assessment about, okay, I've got to drop the mask in some way. And what are the repercussions going to be? What is that journey? What's that experience? And the amount of courage that takes just to make that one seemingly small decision that to everyone else, it just appears like, oh, you changed your hair. Like, no, I had to break down a lot of societal conditioning. I had to really take a step in a huge step internally to do that. So, I wanted to just show that and celebrate that journey, and just give some understanding to it, and in that process, I started wearing my hair natural, and but that was a big journey. That was a big step to take. So, I wanted to talk about that. And I think with hair and other appearance issues for Black women, it's such a policed thing, like it really, really is. And so it is just a piece of our cultural experience. And the beauty shop is like both a refuge and I don't know, not a prison, but it's like, if you spend 3 hours there every Saturday morning, then it starts to become like, a place you're obliged to go. But
yeah, it's a reality. I love that scene when she's meeting Mark's parents, and she's like, oh my God, I need an appointment right now.
Yeah.
I have a bunch more questions, but I also want to make sure that I get other people's questions. So please, because I'm sadly on my phone because my computer was acting up, I'm not sure if people put things in the Q&A, how to see them. I can only see the chat. There's nothing in the Q&A, right now?
I don't think so.
Not at the moment. And the number will show up.
Okay, great. If people also want, I don't know if that would show up in my chat, but I would just want to say, now is the time. If you have a question, please drop it in the chat. I'm going to continue on, but then I'm definitely going to get to those as they come in. So, I'd be remiss to not talk about arguably the biggest theme, at least in the first book, but is fertility.
Yeah.
And fertility. And I think, when you talk about the epitaph of your 30s, And then, you know, in the next book, I feel like it's fair to say that, you know, it's dealing with pregnancy, but really dealing with, you know, what is that journey and what is that journey to have children and who does that involve? You know, you know, kind of go from these like heteronormative man and woman couple. That is what, you know, that's who has babies together, and really explores that. But I think, you know, the first book starts with her just going to the doctor and finding out that at, forgive me, at
30
age 30,
30
what?
33.
At age 33,
Yeah.
that she has a much lower egg count. In fact, her fertility is in serious, serious question. So talk to me about the theme of fertility.
Well, I also thought that was really, really important to put into fiction, because I froze my eggs in my very late 30s, and I didn't even realize the necessity for it in my earlier years. I didn't know anything about it, and then I found out everything, and it was almost too late. But it's really a war of time and information. And it's a topic that we don't talk about. And there's, you know, so many people, I don't know if the statistic is 50%, but it's a very high percentage number of people who are dealing with some kind of infertility issue. If you go in a room, odds are somebody in the room that you're talking, you know, a woman in the room is dealing with some kind of reproductive health issue. And I wanted to try to normalize that and to show that this is something that a lot of people are dealing with, and that it is something that we should talk about, we need to talk about, and that bringing it into community is the support that we need, even though it's this thing that we feel should be hidden, and it's hidden behind this cloak of shame a lot of times. So with Tabitha, she encounters this by surprise, you know, in her early 30s. And she has to go down this path of learning and figuring out what she needs to do, and also decoupling the societal expectations of her from what the outcome is that she wants to have in her life in terms of her own family. And so that's kind of her journey. But along the way, she goes through the actual processes of, you know, egg freezing and all of the processes to get to that place where she ultimately winds up. In the second book, she is pregnant, but you have to read to find out how. And but I don't want to spoil for anybody. But she, you know, thinks, oh, you know, what her mind, when she finds out about this reproductive health issue, her mind like all right away goes to the conventional. And she's like, her boyfriend at the time, like, look, you know, I've got this issue. What are we gonna do? And he's like, wait, I don't, you know, I don't know if this is what I want to do, and I don't even know if I want to have kids. And you know, so it just kind of breaks down. She has to go through this whole process of breaking that down. But the topic of infertility, I hope it feels normalized in this book. I hope it feels like a normal experience that she's having as one of the layers of her life, and something that she's just got to figure out alongside everything else. So, you know, hopefully this starts conversations, at least, that this is a real thing, that it's a normal thing, that the conversations should be normalized, and hopefully we'll start sharing information and people get it was the book that I wish somebody had handed to me in my late 20s, early 30s.
So true. And how that, you know, how that pairs with Lexi's journey, but also with Layla's, I was always thinking Layla. Layla's journey, but especially with Lexi, who did do it the cooker cutting way, you could argue, and there's still challenges. And so it's kind of introducing this idea that no matter what journey you go on, no matter what path you go on, there's going to be issues, there's going to be tensions, you're going to have to do the work, which I thought came through really well. I'm mindful of time, and I do have some questions, but I'd be remiss to ask about the process of getting this book published.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and how, you know, can you talk a little bit about what that journey was like for you and how it's come full circle?
Wow. Lacey, you've hit all the topics. These were like all the hot topics. The publishing journey was really tough. And when I wrote the manuscript, you know, I'd given it to some people to read and was like, what do you think about this? And the feedback I got was really positive. And it was my dad that told me, you know, you can't self-publish this. Like, don't even think about that. You need to go try to get a traditional publishing deal. And and get some support and, a team. And so I thought, okay, I'll do that. And I was really, really hesitant. I thought, oh, wow, I have a Black female protagonist. This is kind of it's not cookie cutter story. How's this going to go? It's called Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. Are they going to get it? And when I sent it to like gatekeepers, like agents, and I had picked, agents that represented other, Black authors, story, I thought, okay, maybe I got very discouraging feedback. We don't like your protagonist. We don't love this story. Basically we don't see a market for it. And I thought, oh, maybe they'd say like, you need to work on your writing or, something like being my first novel, but it wasn't that. It was all about, the protagonist and relatability. And I just seemed like they were saying, we don't think that the market we perceive is ready for a story from this woman's perspective. And we don't find value in this protagonist perspective. And I just didn't believe that about the market. I didn't believe that about Black readers. I didn't believe that about white readers. I didn't believe that about any ethnicity, reader, or gender. I believe that this is a human story. And I believe that the humanity of Tabitha Walker was more important than any of the attributes that were assigned to her, that it was about relationships and finding one's voice and the journey to fulfillment, and being a seeker in a sense. It's not about that. It wasn't about race. It involved race, but it wasn't about that. The human story. So I just believe that the market was, yes, ready for something like this, to learn from a Black woman's perspective. And that ultimately I didn't want that to be the last word. I wanted readers to have the last word. So I just thought I was going to put the book out myself. And so I did. And I went and made my investments and, got it designed and productized and edited, all the things. I did all the things on my own. And it ultimately wound up attracting an audience on its own across 5 continents. And I spent the pandemic talking to over 60 book clubs, and it just built its own community. And so it ultimately wound up getting picked up by HarperCollins, Harper Perennial imprint, and the series, the trilogy, and a standalone book. So that's where we are now. We're 2 books into a 4-book deal. And it was really driven. It was really the power of community. And I feel like the bet that I made on people, on the audience that I believed existed, paid off. That worked out. And it's just been an amazing journey where it just unfolds with something different and new day by day. I'm getting to have this conversation with you. And
it's amazing. What you say about like the market and what does the marketplace want? That's, we could do a whole other hour of that. And that's a whole other conversation about who defines what the market wants and how we've been proven time and time again that that's wrong. So it's just, had to ask about it because it's such an amazing journey. And it's a great reminder that we have to, that we sometimes know our audiences better even than the people who, put these books out all the time. And it really also takes the legwork. Again, that's why the power of independent bookstores that I think we all have to continue to remember. And it's so inspiring to me to see friends of mine who are authors who continue to really, prioritize independent bookstores and making sure that that's where the conversations live. So in terms of, so now the first 2 books are out, and obviously there's more books to come, but is there any talk, like have you had any thoughts or conversations about the potentials of adapting them into?
I've been having a lot of conversations, and hopefully we'll be figuring something out very soon. It's been really interesting. I just want to make sure that whatever direction we go in, that we're, doing justice to the community of people that I was just talking about, that have been supporting this book and these characters and this journey. So whatever next incarnation of it, I just want to make sure that, and I've wanted to make sure that it's going to be something that is going to be in the same spirit as the books have been, and enjoyable for people who have an expectation of what this, these stories are meant to be. So we're getting very close to that, very, very close.
Well, we're excited. I want to be mindful of time because we are at time. So I'll just ask the last question. Comes from, where did you take the fiction writing classes you described earlier, and any workshops or classes that you would recommend?
I took my, I will say that a lot of the craft classes I took, so the like discrete crafting of like how to write emotion, the erotica writing class I took those at UCLA Extension, and they were just excellent. I mean, I really enjoyed those classes. I did not take novel structure, but based on my experience with those classes, I feel like their program was great. I took classes at the writing pad for novel writing, and some other, I think, television writing, and I thought they were great as well. And they have a lot of people who are active writers who are actively working in their respective industries who are teaching those classes. So I thought that both those places, those are the places that I might be forgetting somewhere, but those are the ones I remember at the forefront of my mind. So those would be the places that I would say that I've experienced and were helpful.
Amazing. Well, we're out of time. I want to ask you about the amazing cover art. I just want to give a shout out to it, especially because that's the art from, that didn't even come from previously. So I just want to give a shout out to how much I love the cover art. It's such an important part of a book, but I want to turn it back to you so we don't run over time. Thank you. This is such a joy to be in this conversation.
A wonderful conversation. I've read Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. I've got Black Girls Must Be Magic. It's in my pile. I was telling Jayne earlier to read, and I can't wait because I fell in love with Tabitha. I think she's great. So very relatable all across the board. I mean, I'm sure there's tons that I missed, but I think she's great. So thank you both for such a great evening. Great questions, great talk. Really lovely having you. A reminder to our audience that Black Girls Must Be Magic is available at oblongbooks.com. It's also available in both of our stores. If you prefer to listen to your literature, it's also available on Libro FM, the audiobook, and the links are in the chat for that. Before we close, I would like to extend our thanks to Kristen Sippola and HarperCollins for helping make this event happen. And thank you to all of you for spending part of your evening with us. Thank you, Jayne. Thank you, Lacey. Great conversation. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Lacey.